The dress is fitted enough to wear on its own, yet roomy enough to layer over a turtleneck or any other close-fitting top. If your measurements fall between sizes, just please combine them. Say you are European size 38 at the bust and a 42 at the waist. Connect those lines. Use the bust dart from the size 38, since that's the size that matches the bust measurement, and the waist dart from 42. Now, the pattern is available on Etsy, and there's a launch sale because, well, I'm launching the pattern, yay! Just a quick warning, the layout is not very conventional. As you can see, there are some holes because, well, I'm trying to save on some ink and paper. Just follow letters and numbers. If you want to save even more ink and paper and you don't care if your skirt pattern is flimsy, there's a table in the guide that says what pages to print. Okay, that's enough of the prelude. Let's get some action going. Whoop whoop, yay! Besides all the standard materials, you'll also need interfacing and 9 buttons, each 11mm in diameter. If you're adding embroidery like I did, make sure to use flat buttons with 4 holes. If your buttons are larger or smaller, you'll need to adjust the buttonhole size accordingly. Let's just say your buttons are 13mm instead of 11. Just take the difference, divide it by 2 and add that equally to both ends of the buttonhole, or subtract if you have smaller buttons. Once you've got all your pattern pieces, just take a moment to clearly mark all the dart points. That means the dart apex and both dart legs. Also mark all the corners of the bodice, like front bodice and back bodice. You can use a chalk, a fabric marker or a thread. To transfer a corner point from the paper pattern to your fabric, you can either puncture the paper at the corner mark and trace that spot directly onto the fabric with chalk or marker, or measure down 7mm or 1/4 inch from both fabric edges. That's your seam allowance. And where those lines intersect, that's your corner. One more thing before we get started, you can actually piece together the facing in areas that won't be visible when the garment is worn. I did it along the button placket and it worked just fine. Just remember to add seam allowance to both edges where the pieces will join. Basically all you need to do is align the pieces with right sides together, stitch and press the seams open. We are starting with interfacing. Why, you may ask? Well, it's because once it's applied, it needs a few minutes to cool down and set before you start handling it. Cut your interfacing to match the exact size and shape of all your facing pieces. We are going to interface them all. Place the facing and interfacing right sides together with the glue facing up, so it's facing you. Stitch along the inner bottom edge all the way down. Basically, this is the side that won't be sewn into any seam later. Pin and stitch it for distance, which is 7mm or 1/4 inch. Most of the stitches in this project will be at that distance. If it ever changes, I'll let you know. Now, trim the seam allowance down to about 3mm, which is 1/8 inch. Open it. Direct the seam towards the interfacing and top stitch. Just a millimeter from the stitch line, which is 1/16 inch. Well, actually, it's a little bit less than 1/16. Do the exact same thing with the back facing. Attach the facing at the bottom seam just like you did with the front. Next, fold the interfacing over so the glue side is facing down, well, basically touching wrong side of the fabric. Align all the edges and trim any excess interfacing that might be peeking out. Smooth it out and give it a good press. But don't glide. Just press, hold for a few seconds, lift and move to the next spot. And just like that, you get this beauty. And just leave it to chill somewhere with a margarita. You also need to reinforce the corners by applying a small piece of interfacing to the corner area of each bottom bodice piece where the skirt will go. The interfacing should fully cover the corner and the dart starting point, as we will be cutting into that area later. And only one thing can stop the unraveling madness: interfacing. Grab the front and back bodice. It's time to close those darts. And yes, there is the right way of sewing darts. First pin goes through both dart legs, right through the mark points. Second pin goes through right at the apex, the pointy end of the dart, and only then you pin in the middle. Connect the starting and end points of the dart. This line is your stitching guide. Oh, and trust me, this makes things way easier. Start sewing at the wide end of the dart, backstitching at the beginning. As you get closer to the apex, keep the needle up and reduce the stitch length to 2, maybe even 1.5. For the last few stitches, sew right along the fold, as close to the fabric edge as you can, but do not backstitch, okay? Instead, leave the thread tails, tie a knot, and hide those threads inside the dart. Press the darts from both sides, which I didn't record for some reason, but you know what to do, right? Bust darts should be pressed downwards. Waist darts, however, towards the side seams. If you find your darts too wide, too fabricy, especially in larger sizes, you can search off a bit of the seam allowance like it's done on the blouse, but it's totally optional. Grab the back bodice and place the right bodice just on top, right sides together. Pin the shoulder seams matching the corner seams first. And only then distribute and pin the rest in the middle. Stitch from the side towards the neckline and press open. Pin the side seams, make sure the dart is facing down, and then just go ahead and serge the seam. Well, because my serger is threaded with 3 spools instead of 4, I stitch the seam on my regular sewing machine first and only then serge the raw edge with a 3-thread overlocker. Well, same shit, different pile. Do the same with your facing. Place the right sides together and stitch in the sewing machine. No need to serge. Press all the facing seams open. At first, press on the wrong side, then on the right side. Always press seams from both sides, unless, of course, you are using very special unique fabric that can't handle the heat. And now, let me present you with 2 entities, the bodice and the facing. These 2 are destined to become one, like toast and butter. They just belong together. So, align and pin the facing to the bodice right sides together. Begin by matching the center back. Then shoulder seams, and finally distribute the rest of the edge evenly all the way down. Stitch all the way from the bottom of the placket around the neckline and down to the bottom of the opposite placket in one continuous seam. Press the seam allowance towards the facing, then fold the seam so that the main bodice rolls slightly inward, just enough to hide the seam from the outside, and press again. Clip into the curved area of the neckline so it lays flat. Just be careful not to cut into the stitches. If your fabric frays easily, you can serge the raw edge using a 3-thread overlocker, but I'm using pinking shears instead though. Then top stitch the seam to the facing. Give it one final fold and press, and here's just a demo of the final result. Now we need to trim any excess facing that might be poking out. Even everything out. Distribute the facing. Take your time and pin everything in place so it doesn't shift. Trim the facing so it's just like a tiny bit smaller than the bodice itself, about 1 mm or 1/16 of an inch. Now the arm side, well, this part is a little bit confusing to be honest. Position the bodice and facing exactly as they'll appear when finished. Align the underarm seams and shoulder seams. These are your anchor points. Starting at the shoulder seams. Pinch the seam wrong sides together, then flip it so the right sides are together now. Turn inside out at that exact point and pin. Do the exact same at the underarm seam. Once both anchor points are pinned, the rest of the arm side should naturally fall into place. Just follow the curve and pin it. You see, on the outside it looks great, right? Inside, well, it looks like a messy pretzel, but yeah, that's what it's supposed to look like. Stitch around the entire armhole seam. Feel free to sew in segments if that makes it easier for you to manage. Untwist the mess. Turn everything right side out. And smooth out the arm side so it lays flat and even. Top stitch the armhole seam allowance towards the facing. And clip the corners of the facing where the seams meet. Only the interface parts though. If the fabric frays, serge or ping the raw edges. Roll the body seam slightly inwards and press. For precision, use the tip of the iron to go along the edge. And lastly, secure the facing to the bodice at the side seams with a couple of discrete stitches. Moving on to the next victim. Skirt. Gorgeous, beautiful, majestic skirt. So my skirt stretched out a bit at the waist, which happens especially when it's cut on a bias. To reshape it, I'm pressing in a circular motion, gently coaxing the excess fabric towards the center and pressing it flat. Both the bodice and skirt pieces should have corner marks. Place bodice and skirt right sides together and pin, starting at the corner marks and then the rest. At this point we are working only with the waistline. Now stitch from corner point to corner point, using a 7mm seam allowance, a quarter of an inch as always. There should be a seam allowance left beyond the stitching line, just free and untouched. Clip into the corner of the bodice diagonally towards the corner marks, stopping to 3mm or 1/8 of an inch before the stitching line. This cut allows the fabric to pivot. Now grab the side seams of the skirt pieces and pin to the prolonged panels of the bodice. You start stitching exactly where the previous stitch line ended and sew all the way down. And that's how those stitched corners look on the right side. Use a 3-thread overlocker with one needle to finish the raw edges. Start with the hemline upward, aligning your stitch line with the second needle guide on your machine. Slow down as you approach the corner. Now get to the end. At the very edge, turn the hand wheel manually 2-3 times, letting the stitches go just past the fabric edge. Needle up, raise the presser foot, and pull the fabric back slightly. Then pivot 90 degrees. Realign the raw edge with the needle and third, lower the foot, and continue serging along the next edge. You see that little cute corner? Yeah, not really. Here you can see better. Press all those seams towards the skirt. Top stitch the waist seam towards the skirt, only along the waistline, not the sides, don't touch them. Do not backstitch by the way, instead tie off the threads and hide them inside the seam. Also hand stitch the seam allowance together at the corners. And if the corners feel a little bulky, you can hammer them down. And after the bidding, you should hang it, as the sides are cut on the bias, so they will stretch out. For buttonholes, do a test run for a scrap of fabric first. Pin where the buttons and buttonholes should go, try the garment on, and ensure that the placement looks good and feels right. Only then should you move to the actual stitching. Use a fabric safe marker tool to mark the start and end points of each buttonhole. For women's garments, the right side goes on top. Therefore, buttonholes go on the right placket and buttons on the left. Use the buttonhole foot and stitch through both layers of the placket. Before opening the buttonholes, pin across one end to act as a safety stop. Pick a sharp weapon of your choice and rip the insides open. Hand stitch the buttons onto the opposite placket and that's how it looks. You have to make a decision though. Stitch through one layer only. It keeps the back of the stitching hidden and good looking, but the interface in the placket will be loose, just flapping around. Both layers. It will secure the placket in place, but the knots and threads will be visible on the inside. Also, if you'd like to add embroidery, go for flat 4-hole buttons. Start your embroidery from the bottom up. Cause look at this last cherry, isn't she cute? And the first one is, it's there, okay? To embroider cherries, you'll need embroidery floss. red for the cherries and 2 shades of green for the leaves and stems. I'm using brown for stems though. Why didn't I use the same shade of green for both? Well, I don't know. Maybe, just maybe because I'm a moron. I didn't think of that at that time. But you can pick any color you like. No one said cherries have to be red and leaves have to be green, so yeah, go wild. Grab the floss, keep those labels on. You need to find a loose end. Pull it. For cherries, cut about 40 centimeters of thread, which is 15 3/4 of an inch. For leaves and stems, 35 centimeters, which is 13 3/4 of an inch, which is more than enough. Use a matching thread to attach the pattern first. Fold the thread in half and thread the needle. You should have a loop. On the right side, go under a couple of threads of fabric and through the loop. Now it's secured. Go through the first hole, then diagonally across to the second one, and bring the needle back down. Back up to the right side, and go through the other 2 holes to make an X. You can actually do other stitching patterns, it's just what I prefer. Again down, up. It should be tight enough for the button to stay in place, so it's not face planting, so that's a success. But in the same time, it's loose enough to accommodate the fabric layers when it's buttoned. If you are satisfied, wrap around and through the loop. That is your first knot. Repeat twice more. On the wrong side, go under a couple of threads in the fabric just to anchor everything in place. That's it. The stage is set for embroidery. A 6-strand floss, pinch and hold the bundle, and then pull one strand free. Fold it in half and thread the needle. On the wrong side, slide the needle under a few fabric threads and pull it through the loop. Bring the needle up to the right side and through the first hole. Diagonal. Back to the first. Under. Bring the needle down to the wrong side. Tie a knot or 2 by sliding the needle under a few fabric threads and pulling through the loop. I also like to add 1 extra pass under the thread or through the knot before cutting it off. Green is next. Start as before, but this time go in through the first hole and out horizontally. Repeat this in and out motion 4 times total. That's the foundation of the leaf. Now we will add roundness with a chain stitch. Bring the needle back up at the first hole. Insert it again into the same hole. But don't pull all the way. Keep the loop on the surface. Bring the needle up through the second hole. Through the loop. Pull, 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 pull. Be gentle. Adjust the curvature. Insert the needle back into the second hole to anchor the chain stitch. A little bit more tweaking if you need to. And secure in the back with a knot, same as before. Why use 1 strand instead of the whole floss, you may ask? Why repeat the same motion if you can just do it once? Well. The answer is huge knots in the back. Massive. The thicker the thread, the larger the knots in the back. French knot cherries. Pick 1, 2-thread cherries or 1-thread cherries. 2 is bulky, but it stays in place. 1 is cute, yet it may sink into the buttonhole occasionally, so be ready to fish them out with a needle. So, you bring the needle to the right side. Up through the bottom buttonhole, hold the thread taut, wrap around the needle 3 times, and back down through the same hole. Keep holding the thread until it's securely knotted. Now pull it through to the wrong side, knot the thread before moving to the second cherry. Last step, hemline, and we are done. By this point, the sides of the skirt have stretched out. You can even them out or leave the sides longer like I did. measure and mark 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch from the raw edge. Fold and press so the edge meets the guideline. Basically, we're just creating 1 centimeter fold, which is 3/4 of an inch. 3/8 of an inch. Ensure both panels, placket, whatever you want to call it, are the same length. That is super duper important. Please be a good girl or boy or non-binary and do it. Now flip the placket, exposing the interface side of the facing, and stitch just below the folded line, just a teeny tiny bit under. Turn everything right side out, make sure everything is good, and only then can you trim the corners. Trim the interface layer of the facing in half, the main garment seam allowance in half, but only halfway through, and the corner diagonally, but not really diagonally, you know what I mean? But rather vertically with a slope. Select a short stitch length and sew over the original line of stitching, especially at the corner, to reinforce the vertical stitches that were trimmed during corner shaping. Turn the corners right sides out and gently push out the points. Refold the hem to the pre-pressed crease, essentially folding the 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch fold in half to create a 5 mm or 3/16 of an inch hem, and press. Stitch the hemline at 4 or 5 mm, which is 3/16 of an inch, then pivot at the placket and continue along it. How high should you go? This is your call. What looks appealing to you? I personally stopped at the first button, but follow your artistic instinct. Final press, and boom! Congrats! You are done! Whoop, 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 whoop. Yes. Yes. Oh. Congrats, darling. You've got the smile, the charm, and now the dress.